I'm going to be talking to Jesse Cardinal, who is the executive director of Keepers of the Water. Her organization and a dozen others have released a letter today that was sent to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith about Imperial Oil's Kearl tailings pond leak. Well, there was a leak back in 2022 in May, and it was never disclosed until early 2023 when there was a 5.9 million liter spill of tailings pond wastewater. It's been a very, very controversial issue, and I'll talk to Jesse about what's in the letter. So welcome to the interview, Jesse.
Thank you, Markham. Nice to be here.
Well, we are doing here at Energy Media, we're doing a deep dive into the Alberta Energy Regulator, and Kearl will play a very prominent role in our report. Why don't we start with, can you just give us an overview of what the letter says?
The letter, so basically what we're demanding, Justin Trudeau and Danielle Smith, is to dismantle the AER. And so they're both accountable in overseeing the regulatory, the regulatory regime, or however you want to word it, in Alberta. And so it's pointing out the devastation that's happening. First of all, like it's one thing after another after another. It's completely out of control. And it ties back to the Alberta Energy Regulator. Well, how does the federal government have an involvement in this? Well, they have a lot of involvement, and they are completely also responsible for what happens here. So if you want to go back into history to the Crown and treaty relationships, the federal government represents the Crown, and then we know that the provinces were formed. The provinces were formed with the understanding that the federal government is still in relationship with Indigenous people, that there's treaties exist, that the provinces are there to support the federal government in co-managing the lands. It was always intended to be co-managed. So how we got away from this is beyond me. And now we're in the mess that we're in because Indigenous people and First Nations have not been included in co-managing the lands. And so now we have and then we come back forward to today, we have the Alberta Energy Regulator. I want to back up a little bit. At one time we had a world-class monitoring system. And so this was, 3 premiers ago, they understood that there was so much happening on the land that there needed to be adequate monitoring. So the Alberta government and the federal government created this world-class monitoring system. Somewhere in there, the Alberta Energy Regulator got thrown in there as well. So all of a sudden now we don't have a world-class monitoring system. That has disappeared. And now we're left with the Alberta Energy Regulator.
Now, Jesse, why are your groups calling for the regulator to be disbanded and another one created, as opposed to reforming the existing AER?
It doesn't work. It's been reformed. It's been reformed several times, and it's not meeting the needs of the people. It has failed several times, time and time again. And there's so many studies out there. There's been a book written called The Hidden Scourge by Kevin Timoney that shows the corruption within the AER. So how do you fix something that's corrupt? You can't. You dismantle it. You start fresh and you start new, because they have completely lost the trust of society. Like, there's no trust there. So we need something new. And that new involves First Nation and Métis communities.
I should point out for viewers that a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Dr. Kevin Timoney about the Hidden Scourge, and you can find that interview on the Energy Talks podcast site, and I'll put a link into the description on our YouTube channel when we get this interview up. And I would have to say, Jesse, that Dr. Timoney proved with data and his scientific expertise that the AER is not doing its job in the oil sands, hasn't done its job for a long time, and that's why we find I would agree that his book and his argument supports the point that you're making. So let's talk about what you want to bring federal and provincial charges against Imperial Oil and other oil sands operators. So that are, their tailings ponds are leaking. Tell us about that.
There needs to be accountability. So slapping fines on companies is not working. These are massive spills that are causing a lot of devastation on the land, and enough is enough. These companies need to be held accountable, and the governments need to be the ones. The governments have set up these help these corporations set up, help these systems set up, and so they have taken it upon themselves to say, we will be responsible if anything happens. If these companies do anything, we give our word on this, that, we're going to make sure that they're doing their jobs, that they're protecting the environment. Okay, well, do your job then. And these companies need to be charged. Those are the systems that are in place. There needs to be fines, because that's how these companies communicate, by money. How else are they going to understand? We're out on the front lines. We're, trying to do videos, everything, to say, you guys are like poisoning the water, you're causing climate change. They're not getting it. The only way they communicate is through money.
Tell us about your idea for creating a new regulator where the Indigenous communities would co-manage, along with presumably a regulator that also had federal and provincial participation as well.
This has been a long time vision, since going back to the time of treaty, of co-managing land. So treaties were meant to be a treaty relationship. And so because we've moved so far away from that, where it's only the federal government or only the provincial government managing these lands, we've seen time and time again how that system fails, because we say we have the answers as Indigenous people, we have the knowledge, and as much as you want to try and take that knowledge and still management, it does not work. And so we're saying, as First Nation and Métis people, we want to be in these making these decisions. We want to be out there doing our independent monitoring, being a part of creating the regulations and policies, because it's going to look a lot different with First Nation and Métis people sitting at the table. We have a different worldview, and that worldview is a necessity in protecting the planet.
The interviews that I've done so far with folks who have worked with the AER or when operated in the oil sands, scientists, those kind of folks. One of the things they're saying is that both the AER and the industry sees the fundamental relationship as between the regulator and the industry, or the regulator and the company. And other stakeholders, like Indigenous communities, are really on the outside. They're there to be consulted. They're there to be placated in some respects, but they aren't fundamentally in the loop. They aren't part of decisions. They have no authority. Is that a fair description of, from your point of view?
So you started off wrong right from the beginning. You called First Nation stakeholders, and that's what industry and governments get. They try to slip that in. First Nations are not stakeholders.
Jesse, if I can just interrupt, I didn't call them stakeholders. I said the industry and the regulator think of them as stakeholders. I want to make that clear. That's not how I think of it.
The industry and the regulator are wrong in that, and right from there. And I've been in several stakeholder meetings where they tried to demute us to stakeholders. We are rights holders, and we have to, and they do that purposefully, and they constantly try to minimize our rights and degrade us to below the municipal government level, and try and create a tier. So you have federal, you have provincial, you have municipal, and then they put Indigenous. We are rights holders, and First Nations especially have inherent rights. So not only do they have treaty rights, they have inherent rights.
Right. So what kind of a feedback are you getting from the federal and provincial governments on this? Have they responded in any way? Or, sure, presumably you've been having conversations with them prior to sending the letter. And what's your take so far?
It's snowballing. And this was inevitable. It was going to happen. We've been meeting with the governments for decades now to raise awareness of the issues of the tar sands, the issues of the tailings ponds, climate change, CO2 emissions. They'll host a COP conference, or they'll do these things to make it appear. They'll create targets of like 30 by 30 to make it appear that they're doing something. But when you go into the communities and you're out into the land, you see that it's more clear cutting, it's more fresh water, there's more climate change. So what they're saying and what's actually happening is not adding up. And because they have not, been doing what they say they're going to do, now we're having more disasters happen more frequently. The disasters are getting bigger and more impactful. And so now it's like there's no denying it. The world is watching now. We have all kinds of organizations. The nations are like out on the front lines now, speaking out. Like it's there's no backing away from it now. They are being forced to deal with this issue. There's no way around it.
I want to wrap up our conversation about the letter's demand for funding into an Indigenous-led study investigating the occurrences of rare cancer. Chief Alan Adam mentioned this. I think his father-in-law has one of these cancers. He was testifying before the House of Commons Environment Committee a couple of weeks ago. And I also saw on social media several of the investigators who the medical investigators who want to do this work, talking about how difficult it is to get funding. And, this kind of health impact, which is so, presumably fatal, it seems like this ought to be easy money to get to do a study to make sure that people aren't being affected. Why? Do you have any insights into why it's been, very difficult to get this study up and running?
Well, it's a pretty simple answer, is that the government relies heavily on the oil and gas industry to sustain themselves. And we've had governments in the past that have worked to diversify the economy, and create more of a balance, because, many groups and people are saying oil and gas is not sustainable, and this is not a way to run a government or rely on a government, because it creates this petro state that we see ourselves living in. And so the government does not want to look at how these industries are causing health impacts, and they're digging themselves deeper and deeper into a hole, because the health issues are getting unmanageable. Sorry about that. The health impacts are getting unmanageable, where I could just imagine. So we're in Alberta. Let me just create a really quick picture for you right now. So climate change is like at a height right now. We're completely dry. Forest fires are out of control. Imagine how many people are going to the doctor today alone just because of breathing issues, because it's so dry, and the anxiety. Like, doctors are saying like anxiety levels are rising. Like, our health system is like completely maxed out. And we need to address the real issues of why. And it's because we're like extracting at an unsustainable rate, and we need to have balance. We need to bring back that balance. And so funding a health study and looking at these realities that we're in, so that we can have that proof to say, yes, these industries are causing a lot of harm, and here's all of the harms. So then we say, okay, what do we do about it now?
Well, Jesse, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights. We'll stay in touch when we get presumably you'll get a response from the governments. And this is a story, as you say, that seems to be getting legs. So thank you very much for this.
Thank you.